There is a specific kind of moment that reorders everything that came before it. Not loudly, not with the drama you might expect, but quietly, in the space between one ordinary sentence and the next. Mine arrived in a bar parking lot on a Friday night in November. Standing in the cold with my phone to my ear, listening to my wife tell me she was still inside waiting for me. I was looking at the bar's entrance. I had been looking at it for 20 minutes. I had watched every person who came through that door. She was not among them. She had left 2 hours ago. Her colleague Tom had told me this in the parking lot, with the specific awkwardness of a man delivering information he hadn't expected to be asked for and wasn't sure he should be giving. 2 hours ago, while I was home putting our son to bed and watching a film and waiting for her text that said, "Come get me when you're ready." The text had come at 10:45. I had been there by 11:15. She had left at 9. Hello, everyone. My name is Owen. I'm 39 years old, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell the story in a way that's honest about all of it, including the parts that don't make me look good, including the months I spent accepting explanations that I knew, somewhere below the level of I'm willing to admit this, weren't true. I work from home as a freelance copywriter, which means I was present enough in our daily life to notice things and sufficiently without external reference points to doubt what I was noticing. This turned out to be a significant combination. I had been married to Rachel for 7 years. We had a son, Sam, who was 6 years old and had recently decided that his life's primary purpose was the collection and classification of interesting rocks, a project he pursued with the systematic dedication of a small geologist who had identified his calling and was not taking questions about it. Rachel was 36, a senior account manager at a mid-sized marketing firm, the kind of professional who thrived in the social architecture of an office, team lunches, client dinners, the specific energy of a workplace that ran on relationships. She was good at her job. She was warm, sociable, the kind of person who remembered your coffee order and asked about your sister's surgery and made you feel, consistently, that you had been genuinely seen. I loved this about her. I had loved it for 7 years. The colleague who drove her home that night was named Craig. And that name, over the following weeks, would become the most significant single word in my life. The work party was something Rachel had been looking forward to for weeks, her firm's end-of-quarter celebration, the kind of event her industry did well. A private room at a bar in the city center, a tab running until midnight, the specific social release of colleagues who had been managing client pressure and internal deadlines and were finally in a context where none of that applied. She talked about it over dinner the week before with the easy anticipation of someone looking forward to a good evening. Nothing more complicated than that. We had a system for these events. I would stay home with Sam, put him to bed, and she would text me when she was ready to be picked up. Not because she couldn't get a taxi, we simply preferred it this way, the specific domestic ease of two people who had arranged their shared life with the quiet efficiency of a partnership that worked. I liked the drive back, usually. She'd be warm from the evening, talking about who said what, the office gossip that amused rather than distressed, and it was its own form of connection, the late-night debrief that felt more honest than most daytime conversations. This had worked for 3 years of similar events. It had never given me a reason to think about it carefully. But let me go back further than the Friday night, because the Friday night was not the beginning of the story. It was the moment the story became visible. What preceded it, the months before the bar, the quiet accumulation of small things I had been filing without acting on, is the part that explains everything else. Rachel had been working late more frequently since August. This was not unusual in itself. Her firm had taken on a major new account in the summer, and the additional pressure had been real and visible and discussed over dinner in the specific way of a professional who processes work stress through conversation. I had been a good audience for this. Attentive, interested, the kind of partner who asks the follow-up question rather than waiting for his turn to speak. I had been proud of being this kind of partner. What changed in September was the texture of the late evenings. She had always come home from long days with a specific quality of tiredness, the tiredness of someone who had spent significant energy and was now ready to be still. What I noticed in September was different. She came home with the tiredness in place, but underneath it, or alongside it, something else. A residual energy, a quality of having been recently engaged with something that the tiredness of the official day hadn't entirely contained. I told myself, new account, high stakes, she's energized by the challenge. This was plausible and I accepted it. The phone behavior arrived in October. Not dramatic. Claire had never been secretive about her phone in any obvious way, and what changed was subtle. A new habit of carrying it rather than leaving it on surfaces. A new angle when she typed. A specific quickness of motion when a notification arrived in a context where she'd rather it hadn't. Once, in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening, I came in from the hallway and saw her close something before the action had fully registered in her expression. She looked up immediately, the specific immediately of someone who has been practicing this response, and said something about a client email. I filed it and said nothing. Our friend couple, Dan and Layla, whom we'd known since before Sam was born, came for dinner in late October. Layla had worked briefly in the same industry as Rachel, and over wine the conversation moved into office territory, the specific texture of marketing firm culture. At some point Layla mentioned a name, Craig, a senior account director at Rachel's firm, someone Layla knew by professional reputation as charming and socially effective. Rachel said yes, Craig, good at his job, and moved the conversation forward with the specific smoothness of someone who had decided not to linger on a topic. I noticed the specific smoothness. I noticed it later, lying awake at midnight while Rachel slept beside me, and I turned it over and set it down and picked it up again and set it down. And in the morning I told myself I was overreacting to a name said in passing at dinner. Sam, who had no investment in my comfort, provided the signal I couldn't dismiss. On a Sunday morning in early November, he came to me with a rock he'd classified as special, the highest category in his system. And while I admired it, he said, without looking up from the rock, "Dad, is Mum okay?" I looked at him. "Why do you ask, bud?" He considered the rock. "She cried in the bathroom again," he said. "Like before." "Like before," I said carefully. "When did she cry before?" He shrugged with the magnificent economy of a 6-year-old who has provided the relevant information and considers his contribution complete. I thanked him for the rock classification and he took it back to his collection, and I sat with like before for the rest of the morning, understanding that my son had witnessed something more than once that had not been mentioned to me. Rachel cried privately sometimes. I knew this, had seen evidence of it occasionally over the years, the specific composure of someone who had been crying and had managed it before coming to find you. I had always interpreted it as the ordinary private distress of a person processing things alone. I interpreted it differently now. November arrived and the work party was announced, and I had no particular reason to be concerned about it. The accumulation of September and October was present in my awareness, but had not yet cohered into a conclusion I was prepared to hold. I was still in the phase of individual signals rather than the phase of overall pattern, and I had not yet given myself permission to move from one to the other. I would be given that permission on the Friday night, in a parking lot, by a colleague named Tom who had not expected to be the one to provide it. Owen enters the story inside a marriage he has experienced as functional and genuinely warm. A partnership with established rhythms, shared systems, the quiet evidence of two people who have learned how to cohabit with care. The work party pickup system is the section's most telling domestic detail. It is the specific ritual of a marriage that works, of two people who have found their pattern and trust it. Owen's professional situation, home-based, present in the daily life without external reference points to validate or challenge his observations, creates the specific vulnerability that the story exploits. He sees enough to notice but lacks the external anchoring that might have moved him from noticing to acting sooner. Sam's observation, "She cried in the bathroom again, like before," is the section's most important signal. The 6-year-old who has witnessed something more than once, who has absorbed it into his normal enough to use the phrase "like before," and who reports it with the complete neutrality of a child delivering a fact. The gap between what Owen believed his marriage to be and what it was assembling itself into is the section's central tension. And the parking lot is where that gap will be made undeniable. November 14th, a Friday. Rachel left at 7. She was dressed in a way that was appropriate for the occasion and slightly more deliberate than I might have expected. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but with the specific attention of someone who had thought carefully about what they were wearing to a work event in a way that work events don't always require. The dress she'd chosen was one I knew well. She'd had it for 2 years, but the care with which it had been selected felt new. I told her she looked great. She said thank you and kissed me and told me not to wait up if she was late. She'd text when she needed collecting. I said I'd be up, no problem. She smiled and left. I made dinner for Sam. We ate and talked about rocks. A new addition to the collection. A piece of quartz he'd found in the school playground that he was considering promoting to special status pending further examination. I put him to bed at 8:30 and read him 2 chapters of the book we were working through. A story about a boy who discovered a hidden map, which Sam had decided was specifically about rock classification even though it wasn't. He was asleep by 9. I watched a film. I checked my phone occasionally. No text from Rachel, which was normal. She wouldn't text until she was ready, and events like this ran their own time. At 10:45, my phone buzzed. Ready when you are. Getting a bit tired, X. I texted back immediately. On my way, be there in 20. I got in the car at 10:50. The bar was 20 minutes away, a route I knew well through the city center. I parked in the small car park behind the venue at 11:12, which I noted with the specific satisfaction of someone who had estimated correctly. I texted, here, outside X. No reply. I waited 5 minutes. Texted again, in the car park at the back. Come out whenever X. No reply. I waited another 10 minutes. Called her. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same. I got out of the car and walked to the entrance of the bar, thinking, her phone is dead, or the music is loud, or she's in the bathroom. Normal explanations. The parking lot was cold, the November air specific and thin, and the bar's entrance had the warm glow of a venue still in full operation. Music audible from outside, the specific energy of a Friday night that hadn't ended yet. I went inside. The private room where the party was held was at the back. I knew this because Rachel had described the venue when she'd been looking forward to the evening. I made my way through the main bar and found the private room, its door propped open, the tail end of a work party in progress. Maybe 15 people remaining, the phase of the evening where the energy has thinned and the conversations have gotten either very serious or very silly. I stood in the doorway and scanned the room. Rachel was not there. I looked again, carefully. The room was not large, and I knew what my wife looked like, and she was not in it. A man I didn't know caught my eye and came over, mid-30s, friendly, the manner of someone who works in a social industry and is comfortable with strangers. You looking for someone? Rachel, I said. My wife. She works here. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not quite, but the specific expression of a man recalibrating what information to offer. Oh, he said. Right. I'm Tom. I work with Rachel. She left a while ago, actually. I thought she might have been feeling ill or something. She left, I said. Yeah, maybe 2 hours ago? Around 9:30? He was watching me with the careful attention of someone who understood that the information he was providing was landing badly and was trying to assess how badly. I figured she must have gone home. Is everything? Are you okay? I told him I was fine and thanked him and walked back through the bar to the parking lot and stood in the cold and called Rachel. She answered on the second ring. Hey, she said. Are you here? I'm in the car park, I said. Where are you? A pause. I'm inside, she said. I'm in the bathroom. I'll be out in a minute. Rachel, I said. I've been inside. I've been in the private room. You're not there. A longer pause. The specific pause of a person who has been caught mid-construction of a story and needs a moment to revise it. I stepped outside for some air, she said. I'm just around the front. I'll come around, I said. No, I'm coming to you, she said. Give me 2 minutes. She appeared 4 minutes later, coming around the corner of the building from the street rather than from the front entrance, in the dress I'd watched her leave the house in. She was slightly breathless. She kissed me hello and said she was sorry. She'd lost track of time. We drove home. She talked about the evening, who was there, what was funny, the colleague who'd had too much wine and started doing impressions. She was warm and present and entirely herself, and I drove and listened and said the right things. And inside I was thinking about Tom saying 2 hours ago and about the specific direction she'd come from when she appeared around the corner. She had come from the street. Not from the bar entrance. From the street. I said nothing. But I thought about it all night, lying awake while she slept beside me. 2 hours. She had been gone from that bar for 2 hours. She had answered my call from somewhere that was not the venue and had told me she was inside and then appeared from the street. Where had she been for 2 hours? Owen's decision to drive to the venue rather than wait produces the encounter with Tom, which produces the information that Rachel left 2 hours ago, which causes Owen to call her. Rachel's decision to answer the call and claim she is inside, rather than, for example, not answering or claiming she'd gone home already, produces the instruction to come around front, which causes Owen to observe her arriving from the street rather than the entrance. Each decision in the chain makes the next link more damaging. If Rachel had not answered, Owen would have had the fact of her absence but not the active lie. If she had admitted she'd stepped out, she might have preserved plausible deniability. By choosing to claim presence in a building she is not inside, she creates a situation where the lie is immediately and directly observable. The car ride home, warm, present, entirely herself, talking about the evening with the ease of someone who has decided the crisis has been managed, is the chain's most psychologically revealing link. Rachel's ability to perform normality within minutes of the parking lot scene suggests this is not the first time she has had to make this transition. Saturday morning arrived with the specific quality of the morning after something that has changed the way you see things. The light the same, the kitchen the same, Sam's rocks on the windowsill in exactly the position he'd left them, and everything slightly wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the room. I did not confront Rachel on Saturday. I had made this decision somewhere in the small hours of Friday night. I was not going to confront her with what I had, which was the fact of her absence from the bar, her claim to be inside it, her arrival from the street, until I understood more completely what I was confronting. I knew enough to know something was wrong. I did not yet know enough to know what specifically was wrong, and the gap between those two positions mattered. She made breakfast. Sam showed her the quartz. She listened to the rock classification with the full attention she always brought to Sam's interests, and I watched her and thought, she is entirely present. She is the same person she always is. And these two things are not incompatible with whatever she was doing between 9 and 11 last night, and that is the most disorienting thing about this. Craig, the name from Layla's dinner conversation. The senior account director her colleague Layla had described as charming and socially effective. I had a name and a professional description. I needed more. I found him on Rachel's company website. Staff profiles were public, the standard corporate transparency of a firm whose business was relationships. Craig Holloway, senior account director, joined 4 years ago. 41 years old, if the professional biography's details were accurate. The profile photograph showed a man who looked exactly as Layla had described, the specific ease of someone comfortable in professional social contexts, the practiced warmth of a person who had built a career on being well-liked. I looked at this photograph for a long time. I spent the weekend in a state of managed normalcy that I found both necessary and exhausting. I played with Sam, discussed rock classifications, made Sunday dinner, watched television with Rachel on the sofa in the evening with her head on my shoulder in the specific domestic ease of 7 years of partnership. I was present in all of these things and simultaneously running a parallel internal process that had nothing to do with any of them. Monday morning, Rachel went to work. Sam went to school. I sat at my desk and did not work. I did what I had been circling around since Saturday morning. I started looking carefully at the things I had access to. Our shared calendar. Rachel maintained it. She was the organizer of our household's time, had been since Sam was born, and I had been grateful for this and had largely left it to her. I looked at it now with the specific attention of someone searching for patterns rather than individual entries. The entries for her late evenings since August. All attributed to the new account, all plausible, all unverifiable without direct investigation. I looked at our shared credit card statements, something I had legitimate access to and had not been reviewing with attention. What I found there was not incriminating on its own. There were restaurant charges in the city center, a bar charge here and there, the ordinary financial trace of someone who had a social professional life. But 2 charges stood out, both to a hotel in the city center, both on evenings when Rachel had claimed to be working late. One in September, one in October. I sat with the hotel charges for a long time. I thought about what to do with them and arrived at a decision I hadn't anticipated. I was going to ask Tom. Tom, the colleague from the parking lot. He had been the one to tell me Rachel had left 2 hours before I arrived. He had done this without apparent calculation, simply offered information he assumed was already known. This suggested he was not part of whatever management was happening around me. It suggested he might talk again if approached carefully. I called Rachel's office number on Tuesday and asked the receptionist to put me through to Tom. I gave his first name and described him, and she connected me without hesitation to a Tom Baxter, account executive. I said I was Rachel's husband, that we'd met briefly on Friday, and that I had a quick question about the evening. He was cautious but not unfriendly. I asked him, as directly as I could manage, whether Craig Holloway had also left the party early on Friday. A pause. I think, yeah, he said carefully. He left around the same time as Rachel, I think. Maybe a bit after. Around 9. Around 9, yeah. Another pause. Is everything okay? I told him everything was fine and thanked him and ended the call and sat at my desk in the quiet of the house and thought about the specific geometry of what I was assembling. Rachel left at 9. Craig left around 9, maybe a bit after. Rachel arrived home well after 11, having been driven, she told me, by a colleague who had dropped her off because she'd been feeling unwell. The colleague who drove her home was Craig. This was what she had told me when I'd asked, casually on Saturday morning, who had given her a lift. She'd said Craig, a colleague, he'd been going in roughly the same direction. She'd said it easily, without hesitation, with the specific fluency of information that had been prepared. Craig, who had left the party within minutes of Rachel. 2 hours between his departure and her arrival home. The hotel charges in September and October. I had, by Tuesday afternoon, a picture that was sufficiently complete that the gaps in it had stopped being ambiguous. The red herring arrived on Wednesday, and it was good enough that I held it for 4 days. Rachel came home on Wednesday evening with a quality of deliberate openness, the bearing of someone who has decided to volunteer something. She sat down at the kitchen table after Sam was in bed and said she needed to tell me something. She said she'd been struggling at work, some difficult dynamics with a senior colleague, professional tension that had been affecting her, that she'd been trying to manage without bringing it home. The colleague, she said, had been making things uncomfortable, and she'd been dealing with it through HR. She named the colleague, a woman named Sandra, the account director. It explained the private crying. It explained the residual tension she'd been carrying home. It explained why she'd been managing something she hadn't told me about. I accepted this explanation for 4 days. It was real enough. She had detail, she was emotional in a way that felt genuine. The HR dimension explained why it was sensitive. I told myself I had been constructing a case against my wife from circumstances that had an innocent explanation, and I felt guilty for what I'd been doing, and I tried to put it down. I couldn't put it down. On Sunday, I drove past Craig Holloway's apartment. I had found his address through a combination of the professional profile and an old directory listing. Not difficult, nothing that required expertise, simply the application of ordinary online research to a specific question. His building was in the east of the city, a modern conversion, the kind of address a successful 41-year-old account director would have. I drove past it at 11 on Sunday morning. I didn't stop. I just drove past. Rachel's car was in the visitor parking bay outside it. Owen's post-party behavior maps the psychology of a man who has moved past the phase of motivated reasoning into the phase of structured investigation while maintaining the surface of ordinary life, a split state that he describes with self-aware precision. His decision not to confront Rachel until he knows more is not avoidance but strategy. The awareness that a confrontation based on incomplete information gives the confronted person too much room to manage the narrative. The hotel charges are the investigation's most concrete evidence so far, but it is the Tom phone call that is most psychologically revealing about Owen. It requires him to involve an external person, to step outside the privacy of the domestic into a semi-public inquiry, and the ease with which he does this suggests that he has passed the threshold of needing to protect the marriage's surface above all else. Rachel's Wednesday disclosure about Sandra and the HR process is a sophisticated piece of misdirection. It provides a genuine emotional context. She is distressed about something at work. That explains the private crying, the managed quality of her evenings, the sense of something being carried privately. Owen's 4 days of accepting it before driving past Craig's building on Sunday is the section's most honest self-assessment. The relief of the innocent explanation, its temporary effectiveness, and the moment when the investigation resumes because the mind that has been running the calculation cannot be permanently satisfied by an answer that doesn't account for all the variables. Sunday afternoon. Rachel's car in Craig Holloway's visitor parking. I drove home. I made lunch. I helped Sam reclassify 3 rocks that had been in provisional status pending further review. I put him to bed at 8:30 and read 2 chapters of the hidden map book and sat with him for a few minutes after he'd gone to sleep, looking at his face in the dark, and thought about what kind of evening I was about to have. Rachel was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was making tea, her back to me, the specific domestic ease of a Sunday evening. I sat at the kitchen table and waited for her to turn around. She turned around and saw my face, and whatever she saw there produced a very brief, very controlled stillness in her body, the fraction of a second in which a person assesses the situation and decides how to enter it. She sat down across from me. I put my phone on the table between us. On the screen was a photograph I had taken on Sunday morning. Craig's building, the visitor parking bay, her car. Time-stamped. She looked at it. "I drove past his building this morning," I said. "Your car was there." She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at the photograph with the expression of someone who has arrived at the moment they have been dreading and is deciding how to inhabit it. "Owen," she said. "Tell me what I'm looking at," I said. A long pause. "His name is Craig," she said. "Craig Holloway, Senior Account Director." "I know." I paused. "How long?" She looked at the table. "Since September. The hotel charges in September and October." She looked up. "You checked the statements." "I did." I paused. "The night of the party. You left at 9. He left at 9. You arrived home after 11, driven by Craig. 2 hours. "Yes," she said. Just the one word. Not a confession shaped around explanation or mitigation. Simply an acknowledgement that the arithmetic was correct. "The Sandra story," I said. "Wednesday." She was quiet for a moment. "Sandra is real," she said. "The HR situation is real. I used it because it was true and because you'd started to notice something was wrong and you needed something that would hold," I said. "You needed something real enough to explain what I was seeing." She didn't answer. "The bathroom crying," I said. "Sam noticed. He told me you'd cried before. More than once." Something shifted in her face at Sam's name. "He told you that?" "He came to me with a rock," I said. "He mentioned it the way he mentions things. He didn't know what he was telling me." She looked at her hands. Her eyes were wet. Not the performed wet of someone managing a scene, but the real kind, the kind that arrives when the thing you've been managing finally stops being manageable. "I'm sorry," she said. "Tell me about the night of the party," I said. "Tell me all of it." She told me. Not everything. I suspect not everything, but enough. She and Craig had left the party together at 9, had gone back to his apartment, and she had called me for pickup at 10:45 when she was back near the venue. He had driven her to the bar area so she could be picked up. The colleagues who saw her arrive around the corner of the building. She hadn't expected me to be in the car park already, had expected to walk in through the front and be waiting when I arrived. "You called me from his apartment," I said. "Yes." "You told me you were inside the bar." "Yes." I sat with this. The specific geometry of it, the call made from one place claiming to be in another, the 4-minute window between ending the call and appearing from the street, the warmth and presence of the car ride home, the evening described in detail as if she had been there for all of it. "How much of what you told me in the car was real?" I said. She paused. "Most of it. The party things, I was there for most of the evening. The people I mentioned, the things that happened. I left at 9 and the rest of it was from before." "You told me the story of an evening you'd mostly left," I said. "Yes." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the November street was empty. The kettle had gone cold on the counter. Sam's rocks were on the windowsill, the quartz in its special category, the ordinary evidence of the life that existed inside this house. "The Sandra situation," I said. "Is Craig involved in that?" She looked at me. "No, that's separate. Craig and Sandra don't. That's a different thing." "But there are 2 things," I said. "There's Craig, and there's Sandra." "Yes." I nodded slowly. I thought about the specific complexity of this. 2 separate sources of distress, one of which she had volunteered as cover for the other, which had the effect of making the volunteered truth into a tool of concealment. Even the real things had been used as misdirection. I want to try, she said. I'll end it. I want to go to counseling and I want. Rachel. My voice was steady in a way that surprised me. I can't answer that tonight. I need you to understand that I'm not in the same place you are. You've been living with this since September. I've been living with it since the parking lot, and the full shape of it since about 20 minutes ago. I need time. She nodded. Sam is what I'm certain about, I said. Whatever happens, Sam is protected. That is the one fixed point. She said she understood. She said Sam was her fixed point too. We sat in the quiet kitchen and neither of us said anything else for a long time. The confrontation scene contains two distinct thresholds. The first is Rachel's confirmation of Craig's name and the September timeline. This ends the phase of investigation and begins the phase of reckoning. The second, and more significant, is the revelation that Rachel called Owen from Craig's apartment while telling him she was inside the bar. This is not the affair itself but the active, real-time lie delivered in the middle of a phone call, the specific choice to look her husband in the eyes, metaphorically, and say something she knew to be false while standing in another man's apartment. The Sandra disclosure on Wednesday is the section's most morally complex element. It is simultaneously true and weaponized, real distress used as misdirection, and Owen's recognition that even the real things had been used as misdirection identifies the most sophisticated dimension of what he's been dealing with. The point of no return is locatable precisely. It is the moment Rachel answered Owen's call from Craig's apartment and chose active deception over silence or honesty. Everything before that, the affair, the party, the departure, might have been addressable. That single real-time lie, delivered while standing in another man's space, is the moment that will be impossible to fully undo. The week that followed was the quietest week of my life. Quiet in the specific sense of a house where two adults are managing a reality that has not yet been named to the child inside it and are therefore performing normality with a care and thoroughness that is itself a form of exhaustion. Sam went to school. I worked. Rachel went to the office. We made dinners and supervised rock classifications and read the hidden map chapters at bedtime and said good morning and good night and had the conversations that the surface of daily life requires, and underneath all of it, like a low-frequency sound that you feel rather than hear, was the thing that neither of us was saying yet. Rachel had ended things with Craig. She told me this on Monday morning, before either of us was fully awake, sitting at the edge of the bed in the gray November light, saying it with the directness of someone who has been rehearsing the words and needs to deliver them before the ordinary day begins. She showed me the message she'd sent. It was clear and brief and left no room for ambiguity. I read it and handed the phone back and said thank you. Does it change anything? She said. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I'm still figuring out what needs to change first. Dan came over on Wednesday. Not Layla, Dan, which meant he had come in his own capacity rather than as a unit of the couple, and this told me he knew something and had come to be present with it. I told him the shape of it over beers in the kitchen while Rachel was at a work thing she'd arranged before any of this had been named. He listened with the stillness of a man who is not surprised and has been deciding since the dinner party in October whether to say something and has now been given the specific relief of not having to make that decision anymore. I didn't know, he said. I want to be clear, Layla, and I didn't know. But when she mentioned his name at dinner and Rachel, I registered something. I didn't know what to do with it. You didn't need to do anything with it, I said. It wasn't yours to do something with. No, he said. But I've been thinking about it since. We talked for 2 hours, and the talking was its own form of processing. The first time I had said the full shape of it out loud to someone who could hear it as a complete thing rather than a series of fragments being assembled. Dan listened and asked good questions and did not tell me what to do, which was exactly the kind of friend he had always been. I called a solicitor on Thursday. Her name was Margaret Webb, recommended by a colleague who had been through a divorce 2 years earlier, and who offered the recommendation with the specific matter-of-factness of someone who understood I needed practical guidance rather than sympathy. Margaret was in her mid-50s, precise and experienced, with the quality of someone who has had this particular conversation many times and knows which questions to ask first. We met on Friday morning. I told her what I knew. She told me what the process looked like. I took notes. The decision arrived the following Sunday. Not as a dramatic resolution. I have found that the most important decisions arrive quietly, when the mind has finally processed enough that the honest answer is simply present without requiring further examination. I was making coffee in the kitchen, early, before Sam was awake, the gray Sunday light coming through the window, and I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I've probably known for longer than I've been willing to say. The issue was not the affair alone. I want to be honest about this, because honesty is the only material I have left that I trust. The affair was devastating in itself, but what I kept returning to, through all the nights I lay awake assembling and reassembling what I knew, was the phone call. The call from Craig's apartment. She had been standing in his apartment, having left a party she was supposed to be at for 2 hours, and she had answered my call and told me she was inside waiting for me. She had chosen, in that moment with full awareness of what she was choosing, to look me directly in the face, across the phone, across the distance, and construct a reality that was not real. This was not the affair. This was something else. This was the choice of a person who, at the moment that mattered, preferred a lie to the truth, and preferred it easily, without the stumble you might expect from someone for whom deception is difficult. I thought about the Sandra story on Wednesday, the way real distress had been deployed to contain a false explanation. I thought about the car ride home from the party, the warmth and presence of it, the detailed account of an evening she had largely not been at. I thought, I am going to spend a very long time wondering how many other conversations were built this way, and I am not sure I want to spend that time. I told Rachel on Sunday evening, quietly, after Sam was in bed. I told her I was going to file for divorce. I told her I didn't say it from anger, and I meant this because the anger had moved through its stages and arrived somewhere quieter and harder. The specific grief of a man who has understood something true about his situation and has accepted its implications. I told her Sam was the fixed point and that everything about the practical separation would be organized around him. She didn't argue. She cried, the real kind, the kind that has nothing to do with management, and I sat with the fact that the crying was genuine and that it didn't change the answer. I know, she said eventually. I think I knew. I think you did too, I said. We sat in the quiet for a long time. Outside, a car passed. Inside, Sam's rocks were on the windowsill, the quartz in its special category, patient and still. The fallout section traces the specific emotional arc of a man moving from the immediate shock of confirmed betrayal through the structured decision-making that follows. Not because the emotion has passed, but because it has been processed to the point where action is possible. Owen's explanation of why he is filing for divorce, not the affair alone but the phone call, is the section's most psychologically honest passage. It locates the irreversible damage not in the fact of betrayal but in the specific real-time choice to actively deceive at the moment the deception was most costly. The distinction he draws between the affair and the ease of the lie is the story's most important insight. A person who can transition from one context to another with that fluency, who can tell a detailed story of an evening they largely didn't attend, presents a challenge to trust that is different in kind from the challenge of a single catastrophic act. Dan's disclosure that he registered something at the dinner party but didn't know what to do with it is handled with appropriate complexity. He neither condemns himself for not speaking nor absents himself from having noticed, and Owen's absolution of him is generous without being dishonest. The Sunday morning coffee and the quiet arrival of the decision, I've probably known for longer than I've been willing to say, is the section's most truthful moment. The acknowledgement that some decisions are not made but discovered, already present, waiting to be acknowledged. It has been 9 months since the November parking lot. I want to tell you where things are, with the honesty that this story has required from its beginning. The divorce was finalized in July. Margaret Webb managed the process with the quiet competence I had come to rely on, and what came out of it was what I had built it around. Sam, primarily. Equal time, a consistent schedule, 2 addresses within 15 minutes of each other, so that his world requires only expansion rather than reorganization. He has rocks at both addresses, a full collection at mine, a satellite collection at Rachel's, managed with the diplomatic precision of a 6-year-old who has decided that geological science does not respect domestic boundaries. He is, as best I can determine, going to be okay. Not undamaged. I have given up on the idea of the undamaged outcome, which I think does children a disservice by setting up an expectation that loss leaves no trace. But okay. Loved, stable, in possession of 2 parents who have managed the ending of a marriage with more care than I would have thought possible from inside it. I moved into a flat in January. I furnished it slowly, choosing things because I wanted them in my life rather than because they filled a space. There is a desk by the window where I work in the mornings. There is a kitchen table where Sam eats breakfast on the weekdays I have him, and where he has established a temporary classification station for rocks that need assessment before being returned to their permanent location. There is a shelf in his room where the special category rocks are displayed in a row, the quartz prominent at the center. I still work from home. This turned out to be the right decision for this period, the specific stability of familiar surroundings, the ability to be present when Sam is dropped off after school, the continuity of the physical space within which I have been doing the quiet work of rebuilding. The work itself improved, which surprised me. Without the background hum of managed uncertainty that had been running continuously since August, I found I could think more clearly, could be more fully present in what I was writing. The relief of not carrying a thing you've been carrying is itself a form of energy. Dan has been consistent throughout, present on the difficult evenings, available for the specific companionship of a man who tells you the truth and doesn't require you to perform a version of recovery you haven't yet reached. We had dinner last week and spent the first hour talking about nothing to do with any of this, and I realized afterward that this was itself a marker. The conversation about other things arrived at naturally rather than as avoidance. Tom, the colleague from the parking lot, the man whose ordinary, unconsidered disclosure of the fact of Rachel's departure set everything in motion. I thought about him more than he probably deserves. He had no idea what he was providing when he told me she'd left 2 hours ago. He was simply answering a question, offering information he assumed was already known. The inadvertent witness. The person who tells the truth without understanding they are telling it, who becomes the hinge of a story they didn't know they were in. I went hiking in the Peak District in April with Dan and 2 friends I'd known since university. 3 days in the hills, the specific medicine of altitude and effort and the indifference of landscape to human problems. I came back lighter in a way that was not metaphorical. Something had been set down in the hills that I had been carrying since November, and while I couldn't have said precisely what it was, its absence was real and its realness was the evidence of its having been there. I met someone in June. Her name is Kate, and she's a secondary school science teacher who was at a friend's birthday dinner with the specific coincidence of social networks that overlap in unexpected places. We talked about rocks, inevitably, given that Sam had been described to her and she had the professional interest of someone who teaches geology at GCSE level. She knew things about quartz that I was going to be able to pass on to Sam that would elevate his classification system significantly, which felt, in the moment, like the universe making a joke I appreciated. We had coffee twice. We text in the evenings. Nothing certain yet, but something real, something that arrived without the weight of performance or management, and after 9 months of processing the specific cost of performed warmth, the genuine quality of this was something I noticed immediately and valued accordingly. What I've learned, set down honestly rather than packaged. I've learned that the lie in the parking lot was more revealing than the affair it was concealing. Not because the affair was minor, it wasn't, but because the lie was a real-time choice, made in full awareness, delivered with practiced ease. What a person does in the moment when discovery is possible tells you something about who they are that the slower architecture of a sustained deception doesn't always reveal. Rachel chose, in that specific moment, to claim presence in a place she wasn't, with a fluency that suggested this was not the first time she had made a similar choice. The ease of the lie was the information. I've learned that the people around a marriage in distress carry more than they usually say. Tom, who offered the parking lot information without understanding its weight. Dan, who registered something at the dinner party and held it privately. Sam, who came to me with a rock and mentioned the bathroom crying with the complete neutrality of a child reporting a fact. The observers in a marriage know things the participants don't acknowledge, and sometimes their knowledge arrives in the most ordinary possible packaging. And I've learned, this is the part one hold most carefully, that what comes after is not a smaller life. It is a more deliberately inhabited one. The flat chosen with actual attention. The morning desk by the window. Sam's geological classification station at the kitchen table. Kate's knowledge of quartz. The Peak District hills in April, and the specific lightness of something set down in high places. Studies suggest that in the majority of discovered infidelities, the discovery comes not through deliberate investigation but through an inadvertent disclosure, a conversation overheard, a message seen, a colleague who says the wrong right thing at the wrong right moment. The parking lot was my inadvertent disclosure. Tom was my inadvertent witness. And the story that followed from that Friday night in November was not the story I would have written for my life, but it was the one I got, and I have found, with the specific surprise of someone who didn't expect to, that the story you get worked through honestly can become a life you're genuinely glad to be living. I am glad to be living mine. The rocks on the shelf confirm it. In their patient, geological way, they always tell the truth.